Welcome to the Hopeless Hobby Addict. Today we're going to dive into Dungeon Saga Origins. This is episode 1, which is going to be the Undead Trolls. There's a boss troll. He's holding a big old rock here. And then there's 2 little minion minis. If you're not familiar with Dungeon Saga Origins, it's basically a dice chucker, dungeon crawler, very similar to Hero Quest. We'll be painting this up with speed paints and acrylic paints. Step 1, there were a number of mold lines I discovered as I started looking at the models. This always seems to happen to me after I prime them, which is unfortunate. There's some on the legs, arms, and various parts depending on the model. Base coat, I just did a gray primer and then a zenithal spritz of white down, and then I come back and dry brush more white on them to try to bring up those highlight spots a bit more. Both these minis had a lot of these little flesh-torn holes in them, gouges, various things. So for those, I do start out by hitting everything with Army Painter Speed Paint 2.0, Murder Scene, and I dilute that 1-to-1 with the Speed Paint 2.0 Medium. I like the Murder Scene. It's just it's kind of a nice dark reddish purple. It's a good base tone for filling these holes in between the ribs and any obvious flesh wounds I could find on them. So for the first coat, I start out with a 1-to-1 mix of Army Painter Speed Paint Camo Cloak and Medium. This is kind of the initial base color of the skin. I'm going to be going over this with additional layers of colors and then highlights. I try to just get a nice, smooth, consistent coverage on any of these spots that weren't the open wounds, or the bones, or the intestines hanging out. Things like those I skip. And just hit everything else with a thin layer of this to get them prepped up for what's next. You'll see at the end photos as well, one of the basic minion undead trolls, I did a camo cloak and the rigor mortis flesh, just to try something different. I included it here, just so you can kind of compare the two. That was pretty much a 1-to-1 camo cloak to rigor mortis, and then diluted that with a couple drops of the medium. So after that initial skin coat, I go back and kind of do some cleanup. This is back to white again. I also try to hit the teeth, the eyes, the intestines, the necklace, any bones that are poking out either on the bone necklace or his elbow bone, spine. I think there's a knee bone in there too. Anywhere you see the bones poking out, I was prepping those. So for the second layer of skin coloring, I came back with the ochre clay color from Army Painter Speed Paint. This is a 2.0 color as well. And I diluted that 1:2 with the Speed Paint medium. Didn't want it to be overpowering. I was trying to, I guess, kind of yellow highlight up over the camo cloak. It seemed to work pretty good. I wasn't trying to make a perfect layer either. I was blotching it on in some spots just so you could still see some of the alternating green color under it. We're going for that grotesque kind of rotting skin look. The ochre clay also looks nice in the eye sockets if you want to kind of go like the art on the card in the game. They just kind of have like a glowing yellowish eye. For the loin cloth or leather, whatever this material is, I went with Satchel Brown, 2:1 with Speed Paint Medium. So this is kind of the darker undercoat, I guess. You could say I let that kind of get into the recesses. I was a little more wet on the brush to let some get in there. So while the clothes are drying here, I decide to hit the bones around the body with some bony matter. You could dilute that, I guess, with a drop of medium. This time I just went straight with it, though. I wasn't going too heavy with it, but it's a pretty light khaki-ish color to begin with. I didn't want to really dilute it down much. Now that my Satchel Brown is dry on the cloth, I decide to come back and I want to glaze over some hardened leather, diluted 1:1 with Speed Paint Medium. It's kind of that reddish brown, and I'm kind of using that as the highlight. I'm hoping it'll show through on those ridges and high spots a bit better when I put this on. I thought it came out pretty good. I ultimately decided to put a couple coats of that around the necklace, so that'll be the strap on it, like a leather strap. Took a couple coats to get it dark enough, but it worked out pretty good in the end. So I make a pass with white again on the toenails, the fingernails, and kind of across the top of those bones on the necklace I just did. Give a point to be able to highlight up with a different color. And then I come back and hit those all with Pallid Bone from Army Painter Speed Paint. A little more of a yellowish tone than that bony matter. I go ahead and hit the knees, the ankles, the spine, elbows, any of those protruding bones that are coming out of them, his ribs, his teeth. I also hit the bones on the necklace again. And the intestine. This is kind of the first color I hit that with. It's kind of a yellowish, icky tone on the intestines, so it was a good base for that. I took the flesh wash and we hit the open sores, the toenails even, the intestines, pretty much anywhere, a little bit on the forehead, around his body where I wanted to get some more shading and definition in some of those cracks. Then I come back with some strong tone. I wanted to hit the bones and intestines and a few of those spots. Then I decided maybe to try to just level out the overall skin color using some Army Painter military shader. I think this was probably from the original war paint set I had. So I'm still utilizing that old stuff. I'm not using all Fanatics stuff. They do have a green tone in the Fanatics line, but I still have all these old paints, and I'm using them where I can, where it makes sense, mixing everything in. You know, I stared at the foot for a while I was painting this guy. At one point I thought it was like, is this part of a shoe or a boot or some weird treaded thing he had on the bottom of his foot? You know, big old sandal. And then I realized it was just the mold had popped out of the part in the base where it was supposed to be glued in. So, super glue. I grabbed the leather brown from the Army Painter Fanatics, and I went through and tried to do a few little touch-ups on the highest peaks in that. I don't know if it's leather or cloth. Maybe that should have been cloth, but regardless, I'm treating it almost like leather. And I just want to bring them out a bit more, do a little more edge highlighting on it. So I wanted to practice doing some skin highlights. I'm rusty. I am. Way too much time in the speed paint world lately, going for speed. I was painting this series more because my kids were playing the game with me anyways, and I wanted to start cranking some of these out. So I could have just stopped where I was with the speed paint, but I want to try some of the Fanatic triads here. So I start with some Rainforest, which is part of the Vivid Green line. Then it starts going into that yellowish green, which is in line with the color scheme I was going for with these guys. Just started kind of hitting some high points on the muscles in various areas. And I'll come back and do some more with some lighter tones here in a bit. So I decided to take a pass at doing some bone highlights. They just weren't popping out enough for me yet. They kind of blended in there with all the other colors. So some skeleton bone from Army Painter Fanatics on the high parts of the rib bones and the necklace bones. So for the rock, I'm pretty happy with Gravelord Gray diluted down with some speed paint medium. I've used that a lot in the past for a quick, easy rock, so that's what I went with here. I guess it almost looks more like granite or marble when I go that approach, but you know, it's a chunk of a pillar or something from the dungeon. You know, it's not just a rock you found outside. I'm sticking to that story. We're gonna bloody it up here later anyways from pummeling some adventurers with it. So for the eyes, I decided to go in with some demonic yellow, Army Painter Fanatics. So something yellow. Again, I could have stopped earlier with just using a dab of that Orker Clay speed paint in there too. That was a pretty good yellow, but I decided I want these to glow a bit more. I did it on the alternate painting scheme guy here too. Popped out pretty good though. I like how it looks. So one of my downfalls sometimes is I'm not always brave when it comes to the skin highlights. I don't put enough, and so it doesn't really bring things out. You know, we usually end up putting a wash or doing something else over a model when we're done with highlights anyways, and I always got to remember, bring them up past the level I feel comfortable with, and they usually looks fine in the end, but take some mental coaching of myself sometimes to get to that. So this time I did another pass with the rainforest, and then I'm going to step up one more level in the triad of greens, and we'll mix that in here in a moment for that final high level. And this is pretty thin. I'm really just kind of trying to really just do some glazing here for the most part. So to bump it up, I'm still sticking in that same vivid green line, and I go for Afterglow. It's almost, it almost looks like a yellow, but there's a little bit of green in it, and I mix the rainforest in with it on the first pass to kind of transition, and a little more pure Afterglow for my very, very, very last kind of maybe a few additional highlights I do at the end. And like I said, I made sure I went a little higher on the highlights this time because I did come back through with a really watered down, really thin pass with the military shade again. So this is very thin glaze of that wash just to try to tie everything together. So for the bone necklace, it just still wasn't popping enough when I was looking at it on the table test I did. So I ended up pretty much doing the full triad here and stepping up to the bony spikes for that final level of highlight. Just trying to hit the tops, the rounded parts of those bones. After I highlight up the necklace with the bony spikes, I just want to dirty it up a tiny bit with just a diluted soft tone from Army Painter. So this is one of the effects paints called Dry Blood from the Fanatics. And initially I went in and tried to put that, blotch it in on the intestines where the guts are kind of falling out of them. I also did the little torn in half bodies, intestines on the non-boss mold. And just hit different spots with it a little bit. Just kind of messing with it. Some in the mouth. I figured I wanted to get into the True Blood effect paint. And as you can see, it is not easy to film, hold, and flick one-handed, so I kind of scrapped that idea. I was not able to flick the paint out easy and decided to go jabby instead here and blotch some on the rock. He beat a lot of heads in with that thing. I really wish I got to figure out a way to do like hair and brain matter. Anyone got a good recipe for that? I was thinking of like painting up wisps from a Q-tip or something and kind of sticking them in there, as some hair, but I don't know. After the rock was done, I kind of went through both models and hit various parts on the open wounds, trying to gore some of those up a little bit. This kind of has a glossy, glistening sheen to it too, so I was hoping to make them look a little wetter. So for the base, I kept it pretty simple. Loaded them up with some Elmer's glue. And then I had these, it's like a black, pretty small granule rocks I got at the local Michael's store. I'll put a link down in below to their website, what it is specifically. Once I get those rocks glued on and they dry, I start applying just some acrylic black ink, Taylor Rowney, whatever you got. I usually do that around the bases and the rims, and I'm just trying to hide all the plastic under the rocks where I didn't fill in. So I'm trying a couple darker grays for the dry brush of the rocks, and then moving up to a lighter gray. I pulled out the Army Painter War Paints Dungeon Gray for the darker gray initial dry brush. Good way to use up some of those old colors. Use them up for dry brushing. Then I stepped up to Stone Golem, also from the old War Paints. I've been finding this is a great use for some of those, using them for your dry brushing and scenery and things you don't want to waste your more expensive Fanatics on. And once I got them all highlighted up, I actually went back with a really diluted down Gravelord Gray, so it would kind of match in with the rock in his hand and other things. So I opted to hand paint on varnish. It's still not very good weather. It's pretty humid right now and wet. It's the rainy season in Washington State. So I went with trying out a few of these effects paints. I guess they call them in the Fanatics line. I hit all the open wounds and the bloody rock front. Anywhere that's kind of open sores or liquid, I wanted to make it shine a bit more. Once I got the wounds and blood and everything all glistening, then I came back with a matte varnish for the skin and the cloth and those areas I didn't want to be shiny and wet looking. So it worked out pretty good. I was a little more lazy on the other two alternative models. I think I tried like just a satin gloss on one of them and just a normal gloss on the other. Alright, that wraps up this episode. So I used the new camera to try to take these end photos as well. It does that whole bokeh effect, blurry background, while you focus on the mini up front. Still trying to get that focus thing down though. It's tricky, bear with me. Hopefully this episode helped some people get some ideas on how to paint up your Dungeon Saga Origin trolls, or undead trolls as they are. I'm just kind of painting them up as we start going through these campaigns with my kids on the table, so they'll happen when they happen organically. I think this camera worked pretty well, so I'm feeling comfortable and probably getting back to doing some Deep Rock Galactic. As always, appreciate you stopping by. You can like and subscribe if you want to be notified on new content. See you soon.